Hey guys, what's going on? This is Jim and Roth here, and we are going to talk full spoilers for Interstellar. This is a
That's right.
special Interstellar spoiler cast. Seriously, we're talking about everything. So if you haven't seen the film,
Why are you watching this now? Come back to it.
well, check out now, go see it or whatever, and then come back once you've seen it and join with us to discuss the film. So the first thing that we want to say is that there is a review up of the film on the site.
True. By
I
you. You.
I wrote it.
That's right.
Um, a lot of comments discussed the fact that I had to basically say nothing about the plot in reviewing the film. So this is an opportunity for me to sort of pull out some of the finer details and things that I couldn't discuss in the review because they were spoilers about the film. First and foremost, though, so you have a sense of what I thought of it if you've looked at the review. I hope you have. What is your overall take? And then we'll get into some of the gritty details.
I went into the movie, cautiously optimistic of all the Nolan movies, and I'm a big Nolan fan. I do like his work. I've seen all of his movies, and I have to say, going into it, of all the trailers and clips that I had seen, there was never that overwhelming, oh wow, I cannot wait to see this movie moment in any of that stuff. Even Dark Knight Rises, love it or hate it, it had those holy crap moments in the trailer where you're like, I want to see that. I want to see that football field blow up. I want to see
Sure.
Bane break Batman, all that stuff. There was never any of that in any of the lead up
Or I would say
materials
even
that I
in
saw.
Inception when they had the trailers that
Oh
showed
yeah,
that snippet of the hallway scene. I mean, that
yeah.
scene, even just in the trailer alone, I can still watch it today. It just blows my mind. Go ahead.
So going into Interstellar with modest expectations, but knowing that it's Nolan, and I love that guy. I love his movies. Um, I have to say I walked out very disappointed. I think it's a movie that has moments of being good.
Uh-huh.
It has moments of almost being great, but it really implodes. It really goes supernova in the last third of the movie, and that was enough to ruin the overall experience for me. And it was the first time I really felt like this guy didn't have as much of a handle on things as I thought, and it didn't really excuse me, it didn't really work for me ultimately on either an emotional level or an intellectual level or just as on an entertainment level. I thought there were moments where I was like, "Oh, that's cool," and then some moments of performances where I thought it was really effective or it made me think for a moment, but it never quite. The sum wasn't the parts.
The sum didn't equal its parts,
That's
basically.
right.
So I would
Sorry.
say this about the parts. I mean, first of all, just let me preface by saying that there were a few films that I watched repeatedly as a kid with my family. 2001 was definitely one of them. And, I. The Right Stuff, which is a
Yeah.
movie he's quoted, he's talked about being a great inspiration for this film, is one of my favorite movies. I love that film. I'm doing my top 10 list right now. It's probably going to be on it. Um, so the film was a little more, I think, kind of geared to my tastes.
Yeah.
And I do think like it ended and here's the thing is that there were even the very first screening, which is the one that I saw, one of the very first screenings of the film at all. And there were very divergent opinions even then. Some people were weeping. They just had a huge emotional connection. The movie took them to a place emotionally, whether it had logical breaks or not, didn't matter. And I totally respect that, by the way. Other people were really like disliked it. I mean, they
Yeah.
almost to the point of hate, which I thought was an extreme reaction. Personally, I get it because you can't get past those things that you consider to be the logical errors. I saw many things in the film that I loved. I thought it had some really strong performances, great moments. It really has.
Yeah.
He does beautiful moments. I loved the Matt Damon stuff. We'll get into that more
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
bit. Some people hated it. I thought it was bananas in the best possible way and really fun. Um, I thought the movie was surprisingly funny.
See, I didn't really, I didn't
You
understand
didn't
why there
like his
was.
little robot friend?
No, I didn't really get that. I didn't understand why they were suddenly smart alecky robots, or you would. Yeah, it didn't really to me. It didn't really add much of anything to the movie. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. It was fine. I think it was just
If I can just finish though.
Sure, please. Yeah.
Anyway, so I thought it was surprisingly funny. I thought it was definitely a hugely ambitious film on his part. It took on a big topic, an unwieldy topic, which is time and relativity. Worked very closely with Kip Thorne. It's beautiful. I thought the mix was very problematic. There were key moments of dialogue that I could not hear that I thought was very
Yeah.
problematic. I don't know if it
Same
was
here.
the theater or the mix, but what we want to hone in here, I think, is we want to start honing in on what are maybe some of the logical flaws in the story. And we're
Yeah.
not going to talk about the science because I think that's a really cool perspective to get into, other than in very general terms. But because
Well,
we're
when
not
I left NASA, I said
right,
no.
because we're not Kip Thorne,
We're
and
not Kip Thorne.
we're not theoretical physicists. We
But
know it,
neither
and
is
you know it.
Christopher Nolan. And just saying the words relativity and singularity several times in your movie doesn't necessarily mean it's smart.
Right, right. So, well, let's just talk about some of the logical breaks.
Not saying the movie's dumb. I'm just saying Star Trek did all that stuff too.
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that if it's a science fiction film, which this ultimately is, because it's taking sort of a scientific baseline or a possibility, which is what sci-fi does, and then going, yeah, but what if? What if this happened now? We can't know because we haven't been to those far reaches of space. What would actually happen?
Yeah.
It really is theory. I know there's some people who be like, it's proven, but we haven't been there, so we don't know. And things that people thought were fact have changed and evolved and been shown to be not accurate time and time again over human history. So I have total respect for the work that they did. We are not theoretical physicists, so we're not going to talk about that, but we are going to talk about the things where the story doesn't maybe connect to its own logic.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the human behavior right there. Morse code leads him, and it's possibly going to sound negative because what we're going to want to do is illustrate some of the finer details. But overall, I will say this: there's a lot to be respected about that movie. I gave it a high score. I think it deserves it. I just think that there are some things that were problematic for me, but I understand if they weren't for you, if it was just a beautiful emotional experience for you. Okay. The human behavior. So Morse code leaves them to NASA, all right? And their first reaction is, and I understand that they know each other, but is like, oh, a supernatural or some kind of it wasn't even a supernatural event. This anomaly led
Yeah.
you here. We immediately buy into that. Will you be our pilot, please? We're
Right.
leaving like
Yeah.
tomorrow,
And we don't have our
and we
pilot.
don't have our pilot.
Yeah.
Or this person was going to do it, but they're really not qualified. And I get that. And that's a small nitpick, by the way, very small.
I
Because
don't think it's a small nitpick at all. You're supposed to believe that he's going to leave his family now. Like he
right,
seriously brings one bag with him. And like there are people who go to lunch and bring more, or
right,
go to a cafe to work and bring more. And this guy is leaving his family behind for the rest of their lives
right.
on a dime. It's like seriously, you're going to change your whole mission without him. He hasn't done any of this for years without putting him through any sort of testing, whatever. Here's the keys to the caddy, the one of a kind spaceship. Go launch it into space, and good luck to you.
Yeah, and and I will say this: the movie really took me on the journey. I just sort of accepted things until the final act, and we'll get to that. But I think that in looking back on it, you can start to see some of these things and go, "Oh, that's strange behavior,"
Yeah.
and maybe that's okay. We accept that. That's a story point. I think we could get into that even more in finer detail and mine the reasons why that doesn't make total sense. What's going on there? But I think you can also accept that bit. So let's move on to another thing that not many people have mentioned, but actually sort of troubled me, which was Murph's emotional response as an adult.
Yeah.
I understood why she had that response as a child, but once she starts working for the man for her whole adult life and on the problem that sent her dad into space, I'm not quite sure pre the confession that
Yeah.
there is no solution A, why she is still holding on to like, why did you leave me, daddy? I'm not, you know what I mean? That doesn't really make sense to me when I feel like there are adults who as a child were abandoned by their parent for a lot, not that great a reason, who still as an adult start to rationalize, well, maybe this is where that person was coming from.
Yeah.
She knows exactly where he was coming from. She
Yeah.
knows what he's doing, what the mission is. She works there. So why is she still sort of behaving
Well,
this way?
I mean, I think after she finds out it's a lie, part of her thing is, does she think that he knew that and he left anyways?
But she's acting that way before she found out it was a
Yeah.
lie.
I mean, I think it's just simply just a storytelling.
device.
Yeah, just to give her some sort of issue that can be resolved later on. But
But then we meet her as Ellen Burstyn in her later years, and she goes, "I always knew you were coming back." Well, no, you didn't. So,
yeah,
like for 30 years, you didn't talk to
yeah,
him because you thought he wasn't.
yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of issues with that character that I have, and there are a lot of issues, and one is the fact that it does start off with these sort of uh, pseudo documentary snippets,
Right.
and the first one being Ellen Burstyn. Well, you don't put her in your movie talking about her father unless that's going to pay off. So right there, I know the Earth was saved and that humans survived. So right from the get-go, I knew, well, this mission worked out somehow, which kind of, to me, robbed it of some suspense.
Right.
So I knew that they were going to have to come back to her at some point because you don't put her in your movie. Maybe a lot of people can't recognize her or don't know who she is, but it's one of those things where you're like, the fact that you're showing older people reminiscing right there, you know something changed.
Yeah.
Um, and if the whole thing is like mankind has to survive, I don't want to know, that yeah, I don't want to see any sort of retrospective reaction on that. Also, we never got a sense of the larger world. It seemed like it wasn't so much about saving the world as this one town in Colorado or Nebraska or wherever the hell they were. You never get a sense of the larger world. You hear that they disbanded the military and they stopped funding this and that, and I
And
think
you assume there's no internet. If
yeah.
if if they haven't been in touch with one another, like if he's like, "I didn't know if you were alive or dead, Cooper," you know,
Well, why would any of that even happen? Why would they disband a military when people are going to be scrambling for food? You would have a military to keep order.
well, my sense from that, I will say this actually. I will say that I actually really liked the created world on Earth. I thought it was very interesting. I thought that was a different approach, and it was a really grounded approach to what would the world look like in the future. It looked like the Dust Bowl. I thought there was something really fascinating about that, in those relationships on Earth.
To me, it looked like the end of Transcendence.
And I and I actually like the little documentary breakouts because I didn't mind knowing that the world was going to be saved. To me, that wasn't the mystery, like, are you going to win or not? It was what got us there. That was like, it was the journey that was sort of interesting to me. So I actually like that, and I liked the created world on Earth because I think what I figured happened was that food started to run out. The world was very overpopulated as it is now. Wars broke out, famine, disease, chaos, and years later, many years later, there was a calm. And they said, okay, look, if we're going to survive it all, these are the things. And it almost became like, less about a global world like we're in right now, and smaller communities where like we have to sustain within our own little pockets and not worry about the bigger picture.
Oddly enough, you know what it reminds me of in that case? Red Dawn.
Huh? Yeah.
The original Red Dawn. But
But then he's got an intergalactic mindset, much less a
yeah.
little small
Well, he's
community
sitting there,
mindset.
the world is coming to an end, and he's just kind of bemoaning the fact that I never got to go into space and all
But
that
you
stuff.
know
It's
what?
like
But you know what?
your kid's gonna be the last generation on Earth, and you're worrying about what you didn't get to do with your life.
But
Your
you
kid's 10. That's as long as they're gonna make it, unless you go do something.
Right, but there was something. I don't think they set it up so that he knew that they were in such dire straits initially. It wasn't until Michael Caine told him that he knew that they were in really dire straits.
Because when Michael Caine tells you something, you take
You
that to
believe
the
it. You
bank.
take that to the bank. I think that actually, initially, he thought that the world is starting to heal and maybe it'll be okay. And isn't it? And I think it's actually very human because you can't worry about the dire straits that you're in every second of every day. I think there are going to be moments when you go, what could have been? What could have, not like the fact that the world fell apart meant that I couldn't achieve X, Y, and Z dream. To bring it to a very different set of circumstances, the fact that the recession hit meant for many people that they had to take drastic career changes and
Yeah.
that the trajectory that they were on was no longer viable.
But like, okay,
And you would still regret the loss.
right, but let's talk about how
We're
it
supposed to
affects
be
his
talking
kids.
about the logical breaks, but
Yeah,
we're
here's one thing. He says, his kid's not going to get to go to college. That's
Yeah.
one of the first scenes is him at
he has
school.
to be a farmer.
He's going to have to be a farmer, and then at that point, it's like the son is almost like dead to him. It's like he clearly, like, to me, that was a big issue. Is Casey Affleck's a great actor, and he didn't really have anything to do except just look bitter and angry. And Jessica Chastain, I really felt like I didn't feel like they really had quite a handle on her character, and especially near the end, where she goes all loop de loo over whatever she found, whatever he ended up telling her via Morse code that somehow saved mankind, but it was never quite clear what did they find, what did it.
The answer. Yeah. I mean,
Because
here.
all they were talking about was gravity and getting off the planet, and yet somehow she was able to live to be an old lady on Earth.
Right. Well, let's get to that in a minute. I will agree with you, and it's something that here. There's two sides, I think, to this coin as well. A lot of people brought up the fact that, like, man, he doesn't seem to care much about his son.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, think about it. It's only been a year for him, though. And in that time, I think, or I don't know if it even was a year, but it's been a very short, relatively short period of time that he because he was also in hypersleep for those 2 years that it took to get to Saturn. So the time that he was actually conscious and awake, I don't even think it has been a year. It's been a, tell me in the comments. It's been a relatively short period of time, and the last thing that he remembers is his daughter's not talking to him. His son is still, at least for a period of time, talking to him. Then he's not. And I think that you bring up a good point that, like, some people were like, doesn't he care about his son? Like, he even gets onto
I
the
mean,
ship, and
he
but
does have that
but
moment where he starts to sob when he sees his grandchild.
right. But I think that it's true that parents have a closer relationship often with one child versus another, and he just happened to have a really close relationship with Murph.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I see what you're saying there. So let's talk about, okay. So I will say again, blown away. I thought it was really beautiful. I enjoyed taking the ride into space and onto those different planets. They were like fascinating to me to think about what the different gravitational pulls would mean and do, and
Yeah.
potentially. So then I'm kind of just going with it, even though I have a few questions and things that are not entirely lining up for me, like some of the
Right.
ones that you're mentioning, and then we go into the black hole. I mean,
Yeah.
first, before we get into the black hole, which I think we're going to stay in for a minute, are there other things that you wanted to bring up that were either problematic or that you really enjoyed?
Um, well, I would say that the timeline, the chronology of events to me was a little screwy. Like, okay, it took what, something like decades to build that ship to get to the
Well,
point.
we're not there yet. That's still after the black hole. We're going to
No,
get
no,
into
to
that.
build the ship that they even went into space.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And it's like, so it took years to do that. You know, they had the Lazarus missions.
Hmm.
So a lot of stuff has been going on. And it just seems sort of like, I don't know. I just felt like that the chronology of events in the movie seemed a little screwy to me, and it kind of ties back into my point about, like, you just now, like, Bran walks in and like, hey, we're leaving like Tuesday. You want to go? I understand that they sent some of their best people already out there, but wouldn't you have been trying to hunt him down
Right.
and, like, come to him? Call him to action instead of it being some kind of Close Encounters wannabe thing of like, well, we found an anomaly and we had to chase it because screenwriting.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the wormhole, that would be an anomaly, right? And so,
Well,
like,
here's another thing: the wormhole. Then, like,
right?
okay, so it was created by some other beings.
No, but we'll
Well,
get,
you're
yeah.
right. Well,
But initially, they thought so.
that's what they're
Yes.
thinking. So, all right. So why is that there? And yada yada. And nobody. I just felt like the wormhole stuff, and it leads into the points that you're going to get to. I thought that became a very problematic kind of device as well.
Right. Um, I think so too, and we're about to get into some of the. It actually, for me, wasn't problematic. For again, it was like I was just kind of taking the ride until the final act, and it wasn't hugely problematic. It was something that I could just go, okay, well, like something put that there. Was it because it actually became an interesting question for me? Like, was it to help us, or are they nefarious?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
are they leading us to our doom? But maybe that's just the way my my brain works. I'd actually like to see the movie again and see if some of these finer points pop out even more, or if they wash away and it
Well,
becomes about the
just another.
experience.
Nah, I don't know. I mean, I this is the first Nolan movie that I really have no desire to revisit.
Okay.
And for me, it's just there were. You can get away with things in Inception or even in his comic book movies or even The Prestige, by saying, "Oh, it's magic, it's fantasy, it's a dream,
It's
it's
a
in somebody's
dreamscape.
head." It's how did Batman know to do that? Because he's Batman. That's how he
Nah.
gets from A to B without any possible help.
Yeah.
It's a cheat. It is, and it's a little hackneyed, but I buy that. Whereas if you're going to draw attention to science and try and have these long expository scenes to explain these things, then I'm sorry, I'm going to hold you to your rules and hold you to um, plausibility
Right.
factors. And I feel like the movie at a certain point just flushed it and said, "Screw it, let's just make things up."
And we're gonna get to that point
I
right
mean,
now.
it turned into and I love Star Trek. I love Star Trek,
Yeah.
but it turned into like some of the wonkiest kind of Star Trek gimmicks that they'll do.
Right, right. I mean, we have another friend of mine was saying, even in terms of like Cooper, and we've touched on this a little bit, Cooper being their pilot, like when he's like, explain this thing to me. I'm flying in space. Shouldn't you know that?
Yeah,
Like,
I
you
mean
should really know
the
these things.
perils of not hiring the guy the last minute.
Yeah, like, but at the same time, what I said about that was like, well,
It could
it's
have
a
been Denzel Washington in flight. They could have
but
gotten him.
it's a heightened circumstance. These are desperate times, calling for desperate measures.
But they rattle off at the beginning. You were an engineer. You
Yeah.
were this.
No,
you were
I
that.
know.
It's like
It's true. You're right. And
It's
those
like
are the things.
relativity. What's that? That's crazy talk.
I explain it to me. And I will say that that was one of those things that did jump out at me a little bit like, shouldn't you know this? But where I was like, you know what? The audience doesn't know this, and we need it explained to us, and this is their way of doing it. And to some degree, I think that in any film you have to just suspend disbelief. Just go like, fine, I know that you need to explain this to us. It doesn't totally make sense. We've seen that happen in TV and films all the
Or
time.
you have the Ray Stantz moment of like, you never studied.
Yeah, you never studied, didn't you? Just, you have to wonder how the education system was and how he became an engineer in the middle of a global apocalypse is another question, but we're going to move on from that too.
Okay.
But it is a valid question. So now we get into the biggest problematic area for me in the film, which is, so he goes into the black hole, which
first of all,
probably
wouldn't
would
it have-
kill him.
Yeah, torn everything apart.
We don't know, but we think so, yes. So, but it didn't.
I mean, it sucks planets in there, and it's devoid of light, and I mean, wouldn't just I don't know.
Well, no one's been in it, but yeah, I mean, yeah, they're yeah, I mean, and again, we're not getting into to theoretical physics here, but as far as I know, yes, it would kill him. But we don't know because nobody's been in there. So at that point, I think they felt at liberty to go, well, we don't know what's beyond, this point. So let's imagine. Okay. Let's imagine, and this is where I start to go, okay, well, let's imagine, but then I still have questions because one, how did he jump to the conclusion that no, these aren't alien beings that are fourth dimensional beings that created this space, but it is the human race that has evolved to a to be fourth dimensional
they're
beings.
They're going to essentially retcon. They're going to create a wormhole that somehow leads directly to behind the sheetrock in his kid's bedroom.
And here's the deal.
Why not just lead him right to the damn bedroom?
Well,
why
but
do you stick him in the wall?
But they didn't. What they did is they created a physical reality that was a period of time. They created time as a physical space for him to play in, and in that space, he was sending Murph messages, not himself, but Murph messages. Now, how he came to the conclusion that it was not aliens, but it was human beings that had evolved. I'm not sure how he jumped to that conclusion. B, if we had evolved to be these, higher dimensional beings, and we were like, oh, it does create a paradox, which is fine because there's lots of paradoxes in sci-fi, going like, oh, hey, remember we're going to send the thing back to like save human race so that we can evolve to this point? Okay. That's a paradox. That's fine. That doesn't matter. Wouldn't you find a simpler way? I mean, why would this possibly be your method to save the human race?
Just, I don't know, send a letter?
Like, it seems like a not,
time capsule?
It's like not really a fail-safe way to do it. So, like, let's...
But it's also, too, like, just the idea of...
And he's sending her really mixed messages, by the way.
I'm sorry, but Morse code isn't... To my understanding, it's not even used anymore now.
Right.
Like, even in the service, I could be wrong, but I believe I read recently that Morse code isn't even something that's used anymore. So now we're, 50 years from now? And he's going to teach his kid this dead method communicating messages. And okay, so he's sending all this stuff. He's sending her messages, but it's this long whatever information that's being beamed to him. How much of that did she lose from just looking at the watch and being like, "What the hell is this?" Like, wouldn't you miss like essentially the first 5 chapters of a story, if you will, of just sitting there being like, "What the hell is this? I don't understand." Like, does he start back at the point where she's like, "Oh, Eureka! He's trying to communicate with me," and start doing it again? Like,
Yeah, I mean, again, I
if
want to.
he's sending her basically data to save the world, which again, I don't understand what data is he actually sending him,
Well, and
sending her.
that's one of the things where I want to go back and rewatch the film to look at that, because what he initially was like, tell him to stay, tell me to stay. Actually, I'm going to give you this information. Here's the coordinates, of and how she figured it out. That aside of NASA, and then it sounded to me like he was almost giving her the coordinates of where
Planet,
of the
yeah,
planet. And so I will say this, if you guys um know exactly what information he was giving her,
yeah.
I saw it one time, I haven't been able to see it again. That is a thing that I want to go back and pay a little more attention to, because I was like, exactly what is he telling her?
Well, they said
Because
they said in the movie that she's coming from Earth, right? At the end, when she's an old lady.
well, yeah, let's talk about that.
So they did save Earth, because who the hell's going to stay there when they're 11
yeah.
in a blight-ridden dust bowl of a place when you can go and live on Elysium outside of Saturn?
Well, this was the big question too for me. Okay, so it's like, okay, exactly what message did he give her? Because if it was the coordinates, I'm not sure why that would have triggered the answer to how to get the ship off Earth and gravity. But if it wasn't the coordinates and it was that answer, and he was, as you say, like, he obviously didn't know that answer,
Yeah.
was beamed it somehow. Why not? I mean, if that's even
Then
possible.
how does he know that the information is correct if he doesn't understand it?
Well, and I really think he was giving her coordinates though. But
Yeah.
but again, okay, so that's
But
the point.
okay, so to get to the wormhole stuff, though,
Yeah.
at the end it's gone, right?
Okay, so let me explain that. That's not
This is
clear in the
crazy.
movie, but that becomes clear. So I did a spoiler-filled interview
No,
with
they
John.
say at the end of the movie that the wormhole's gone.
Yeah, so okay, good. So I did a spoiler-filled interview with Jonathan Nolan, which will be up on IGN.com, where I asked him some of these questions. And basically, I mean, I asked him, like, okay, when you go, why wouldn't these beings create a more efficient method to save the human race if in order to evolve into themselves? And he said, he basically was like, well, this reason and that reason, but it's a good story device. And I'm like, all right. And it becomes a metaphor, he said, about like how it's a bookshelf, because to him, books are the way that we have designed to send information into the future. And it's the idea that you can send not human beings, you can't send human beings into the past, but they have found a way to send information into the past. So that's sort of the theory. And then he also said, look, the further you get out into and more that relativity becomes a part of your life, like that reality where it's not really a reality for us, then things get really wonky and they get bananas. So here was another question. So he came out of the black hole, which wasn't actually near the wormhole as far as I understand it. But he comes out of the black hole, and then
They
essentially
were two separate things.
they were
because
two
there was
separate
the
things.
black hole was on the edge of the planet that Edmonds,
Right.
that Brand wanted to get to,
Yeah.
the first planet, and McConaughey Coop decides to go to the other planet,
Yeah.
to Damon's planet, and then so that's two separate things.
Right.
So somehow the black hole leads him
Back to the wormhole, which is by
leads him
Saturn.
to his home, because he doesn't go through the wormhole in the black hole, does
No,
he?
he goes back to where it was, which is by Saturn.
So okay, all right.
So and that was another question, is like, why is this black hole leading him back to Saturn? But it does. Somehow it does. It leads him back to Saturn. Okay, fine. And then this is where it gets also a little problematic, like you were mentioning. So he goes back. Somehow a ship happens to be passing by. I mean, I would have, happens to be passing by, picks him up. Okay. His daughter is an old woman. So here come the other questions then. They're by Saturn, which initially took them 2 years to get to. So was she building the ships on Earth for 50 plus some odd years, and then traveling for 2 years to get to Saturn, where she happened to run into her dad. Fine, except that,
No, they said that it would take her a couple of weeks to get from Earth to Saturn. So in that time, somehow,
yeah,
but beyond that, like it takes 2 years to get to Saturn, and yet they're bopping around planets once they go through that wormhole.
right.
Like it takes longer to go through traffic in LA than it takes them to
So the
go to
questions,
different worlds on that other side. And it's not like they're going through the wormhole again to get to these other planets.
right.
They're just like bank a course towards Damon Town, and
Damon Town.
that's right.
So the question for me becomes like, okay, so she has built these really, really elaborate, like super spacey. They were very cool visually ships with
Yeah.
how did on a dying Earth, how did they survive on Earth long enough to build those ships? How did they get the resources to build those ships? I mean, if you don't even have the internet anymore, how can you communicate well enough to
Did
get
they
the
say that they
resources?
don't have the
They
internet
didn't
anymore?
say that, by the way, but and you're right. They never said that, and they're obviously using computers. I'm just saying, like, you don't have enough technology for me to know you're alive, which means Facebook isn't a thing, And I can't just like the
I think
internet.
it just shows that Nolan doesn't like the internet and doesn't use it.
Well, but that's what I think. Like, if we don't have enough technology for me to easily find out that you're alive
You know why
and
the internet's gone?
yeah,
Because when Johnny Depp transcended,
transcended.
he ruined
So
the whole thing.
no, but
That's why.
okay. So where did she get the resources to build those ships? How did they survive on Earth long enough to build those ships? How were those ships built? And then
Mind you, they have to build all that stuff underground to begin with to then house and build everything.
right, and so
Although they could have just been using old NASA, I guess, things. NASA headquarters or crap. I don't know.
they seemingly
Oh
don't
no,
have.
wait, they're in NORAD.
Yeah,
That was
okay, but they seemingly don't have the resources to do that. And I don't know how they rebuilt civilization in the amount of time that they did to make it that awesome.
corn.
Corn. So no, corn was going to die. And so then remember he said it was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
next thing to go. So that becomes a question. Maybe there's an answer for that. Let me know. Um
Did they turn to cannibalism? I
and
think that's a
and
legitimate question.
and then the next question becomes she says to him, "Listen, Brand is off colonizing. You should go to her. I've got my kids now. I'm sort of all set. So let's just
I've
assume."
waited 90 years to see you again, but here, thanks for the 2-minute hug, and I'll see you around. Buddy.
Right,
I
which
gotta
doesn't make
die.
a ton of emotional sense. You could figure if she's that old and he's tried to get back to her that hard, you wait until she
I don't
dies.
know, have a slideshow.
Yeah.
Let's
W-
catch up. Tell me what
yeah.
have you been doing?
Wait a couple of years until she passes away and also check in on your son. But let's assume, so now the wormhole is gone. Now, whether I don't remember them saying in the movie, but they may have, Jonathan Nolan confirmed that the wormhole is gone
Yeah.
by the end of the movie. And like, it's as if the future beings are like, okay, well, we've gotten you this far, however far that is. You figure it out from here. So he says to her, you should go find Brand. She's setting up camp. I don't know how she knows that. Brand probably sent back messages, something
Well,
like that.
he also though he's been on the Saturn station now for like a month and all the, so he was probably debriefed and told them what happened.
But yeah, but listen to this. So the wormhole is gone. She says go back to Brand
How?
and is going to send him in that tiny ship. So he's able to reach the far, far recesses of space.
Another galaxy.
Galaxy that it took a wormhole for them to get to initially in that tiny little ship.
Yeah.
He's going to be able to reach Brand, who again, and by the time they're going to be the same age.
And she's the last person on that planet because the guy she went there to
Yeah.
try and be reunited with is already dead.
Right. Well, she's sort of building. She's got the embryos. But my point with that is like, so how is he? Unless the technology has advanced to the point that that tiny little ship can get you to the far reaches of space. But if it can, then why aren't they all there rebuilding?
Yeah.
It
doesn't make any sense.
There's a lot in this last bit that leaves me with just logical questions, which maybe can be reasoned out. I mean, certainly when I interviewed Jonathan Nolan, he basically said, look, we think that at a certain point when it comes to the, like I just said, relatively, it gets so wonky that almost anything is possible. And I'm like, okay, but
still, you have to make narrative sense of things.
But a lot of that left me with all those
Then
questions.
why even say that the wormhole is gone?
Right, just leave it there.
Yeah, Just like, people will just be like, let's go see.
Yeah.
Let us trek amongst the stars.
Right. And I mean, they seem to have, which is certainly possible, like 50 plus years is enough time to rebuild a civilization. And technology, as we know, when it's on an upswing, moves really fast. And so I certainly think it's possible for her to have done all that. But I would have liked even a quick explanation of
Yeah.
how that happened, how she got from the eureka moment to being, in the flying circular baseball ship,
Yeah.
you
Elysium.
know.
Yeah.
So I would just have liked to know how we got there, and if she was in communication with Brand, and if so, why and how he's going to actually be able to reach Brand.
Yeah. No.
Now, those are things that maybe some people are like me and got caught up in, or other questions, different questions. Maybe you all have answers for the things that we just brought up that satisfy you or that make sense to you. That's certainly possible. I will say at the end of the day, I think there's a lot to speak for this film. I understand very good friends of mine that I respect hated it.
Yeah.
Very good friends of mine that I respect absolutely loved it. Just bought hook, line, and sinker bought into the experience and the emotional response. And then there are people that are more in the middle, and I
Yeah.
think that
That's where I
I'm
am.
there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm mixed to negative on the movie. There were, and we haven't even really gotten into a lot of the crazy stuff involving like Matt Damon's character.
Right? Did you like that?
I liked how it started off. I thought him going full space madness on them was a little much. I didn't think that needed to happen. And frankly, it looked a little goofy seeing them roll around trying to fight each other.
I will say that I absolutely love them. It almost felt like a side vignette, like
But
its
why?
own
How
little
did that
short film.
really advance the story? If ultimately it's about
Yeah.
him and the daughter, and was it just simply there to make him lose even more decades back on Earth?
I don't think so. I mean, I can say why I think it was there. I think it was there as a very sort of overt kind of like this man is he's literally named man, and he's the best of us, right? And so I think it's this idea threefold. One, the perils of ego, because it was very clear that he liked the idea of being the best of us and on the frontier. And I never even thought it was possible that my planet wouldn't be the planet. I was going to save humanity.
Yeah.
And sort of how even somebody that we all have a dark side, and so we bring evil with us or not.
I didn't really get that part of it. I got the sense that his ego led him there, and he thought it was going to be something. He gets there, and it's just uh, basically a frozen tundra of a place, and he just couldn't be alone anymore. So he just kept lying, sending information, hoping to God somebody would just show up, and sure enough, they did. I loved Damon's reaction when he's finally woken up and he just
And he
breaks down
weeps.
sobbing.
Yeah.
I mean, moments like that in the movie were really effective. Seeing when they get back to the ship and what was that guy's
I
name?
love that moment.
Amelie?
And 23 years have
Yeah,
passed.
and he's like, "Yeah, I went to sleep a few times, but
I didn't
nobody
want to
ever
waste
showed up."
my
Yeah,
life.
and he was, yeah, that was heartbreaking. I think the movie really captured that sense of sacrifice that's involved in that sort of stuff, and even on the Earth side. But I wanted more characterization. To me, these people were kind of more ideas and not really people.
Well, I would say also with the Matt Damon stuff that, which again, I really love that stuff, and I agree with you. There's some amazing moments in the
Yeah,
movie. Um, is that for me there was a theme that about legacy where part of his desire was like, I want to leave a bigger, I've got two kids which are literally your legacy are your children if you have them, right? Like they're the things that you live on past you. But he Cooper wanted a bigger legacy. He felt like he had a bigger drive to go out and see things and do things. I don't know if it was legacy or just the desire to do that. Matt Damon
the
definitely wanted
pioneer kind of spirit. I think.
pioneer
Yeah,
spirit. Matt Damon definitely wanted a legacy. I love the moment that he's about to pontificate and be like, there's a moment in time.
yeah,
Shut up. It doesn't matter. She had no interest in that at all. She didn't care at all.
Brand
And
or Murph.
Murph. And yet at the end of the movie, the person with the biggest legacy that ships are named after, and
Yeah.
she's Murph, Cooper is her. And so I thought, because she's just doing the business of trying to save lives. So is he, by the way. Cooper
Yeah.
is as well, and he deserves some credit for that. It gets very complicated, but that was one of the themes that I thought was cool that Matt Damon's character did kind of tie into, where it's like we all have competing desires inside of ourselves to be with our families, to have a career, to leave a footprint, to have relevance in the world, and that can lead you astray, and it can make
But
you lead you to bad
he
choices.
also knew though that there would be no humanity left, so that everything came down to just starting on another planet. He was in on Michael Caine's character's big lie, and that's another thing. Like Nolan, it's the same kind of. He uses the same elements in each of his movies. Each one of them seems to, if not revolve around, at least utilizes the idea of the big lie. Whether it's Harvey Dent was actually the White Knight,
Right.
or he's got that kind of thing that he does now, and I felt like making it a giant lie. I don't know if that really was necessary in this movie. I think people realized, like, I mean, he already said to them, to Cooper, your daughter's generation will be the last one on Earth.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there
Well,
was an incentive to go out there and try and do something about it. They did explain, like, we do have a bunch of embryos. You might have to bring those
yeah.
in case Plan A doesn't work. So knowing that Plan A was never going to work, it wasn't like they were overselling Plan A to begin with.
They weren't, but I will say that in terms of Plan A, another kind of logical flaw with Plan A was I understand saying it to get the astronauts into space,
Yeah.
and because if you leave their family and go do what they had to do, but then it was like he's like, I wanted to give people hope, blah blah blah. Well, if your goal is to give people hope, then advertise Plan A. But they didn't. You're a secret organization,
Yeah.
so it's only like the 50 people that work in this building that you're
Yeah.
fooling and giving hope to. It's
Yeah,
really not
it's
that
got
effective.
That screwy logic
Yeah.
of the Batman movies with the idea of hope and false hope and yada yada.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I think it's a really ambitious thing to take on that. Dealing with time travel and relativity and all of that and space travel is super challenging.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think he overly complicated things trying to be clever, and I think ultimately it could have been some of these have kind of rational, logical solutions to these issues, and
mhm.
I felt like he filmed a second draft. Like this movie needed a few more drafts of the screenplay before it filmed.
I would agree with that. Yeah, there's a lot I think that I like about it in terms of the ideas. I like the Earth. I like the fact that it was just an act of nature that took Earth down. It wasn't
Yeah.
robot apocalypse, although that is what it's going to be. And things like that. There was a lot about this that I thought was interesting and
I
rich.
do like that the movie is a pro-science movie.
I like that it's a
you know,
pro-science movie. I like
um,
that it celebrates technology, which is pretty rare in a lot of
and the
sci-fi.
human spirit in a lot of ways. I mean, it's about the idea of mankind was meant to keep going, not
Yeah.
to just become stagnant in one place.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas there, but I think ultimately the execution was muddled enough to make it for me a big disappointment.
And I understand where you're coming from. Like I said, I've seen people on extreme sides of both sides of the equation. I feel a little more mixed. I think it just on a technical level has a lot to speak for it. It has a lot of great
I
moments.
did like that when they cut to outer space, you don't hear sound effects. That
Yeah,
was good.
that was
I
great.
like that sound really is a vacuum in space.
Yeah.
That space is a vacuum, I should say.
Yeah. Anyway, there's some interesting things about this film. There are some things that certainly don't work for either of us. I think that we both agree that they're mostly on the page.
Yeah.
The problems in the movie, though, the mix is a little weird.
Yeah, the sound mixes. I don't know.
Couldn't hear some key moments of dialogue, but that could have been the theater that we saw it in. We saw it in the same theater.
Well, I've heard from a few other people who saw it in a different theater. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it could just be a technical thing that some of these theaters aren't up to the level that Nolan had expected them
Right.
to reach by the time,
By the
his
time the movie was
came out,
released. But I certainly think, it's always great when movies have people talking, and it's fun. It's sort of fun for us to talk about. Whether you think that it's a dumb, whether you think that it's full of holes and or whether you think that it's flawless, I think it's fun to sort of engage in the debate. We want to hear what you guys think. Let's let us know in the comments. You can tweet at us. You can tweet me at Roth Cornett.
at Stax, Staxign.
And, let's engage in a civil, beautiful, wonderful
I feel like
conversation
Christopher Nolan, people. I'm
about
not a hater.
movies because that's what we're here to do. It's not about being right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just about having your perspective, and we want to hear what yours is, and we totally value whatever it is. Let us know. All right, that's enough of Interstellar. I think we've talked about it for a long time.
Yes.
But if you want to talk about it some more, let us know.